All right, everybody. Thank you here for another moment of the awesomeness of Zoom lectures and online education. The best experience you can have in front of a computer screen. Well, maybe not, but we can pretend, right? So, what I would like you to think about throughout my lectures. I mean, look, everybody wants to get a good grade. Like, I get it, right? You want to know what you need to know. You want to get an A. Like, I understand that. But don't you want more out of it than just a grade? Like, don't you want to like have a better understanding of like the world and the place you live and people and yourself? So there are a couple of ideas I would like you to keep in the back of your mind throughout my lecture. The first question is, uh, when I teach a subject, is there a modern day equivalent? And if so, what is it? And how is it similar and how is it different from the period that I'm discussing? And the other issue is, are you noticing a pattern regarding human behavior? I have been studying history my entire adult life. I think about it way more than I should. And I have started to slowly figure it out. And I think that there are patterns to be seen here. They say in psychology that the best indicator of future behavior is past behavior. And I think that when you look at history, it's a very good guide for that. I just don't think that human beings are all that different now compared to the past. That's my personal view, by the way. So what that means is if you disagree with me, that's fine. I want to teach you how to think, not what to think. So I don't have a problem if students disagree, provided that they do so respectfully and that they try to back up what they have to say with data. But the colonial period is a brutal period, but it also led to the establishment of the United States, and here we are today. I mean, as much as we criticize the past and the injustices of it, and we should, the flip side of that is that if we were to undo it all, none of us would be here. Remember, I'm speaking to you in English. That is not a language indigenous to North America. Just, think about that for a minute. And history is a rough, brutal subject. I've never understood why anyone thinks it's boring, because it has all the elements of drama that you could ever want. But it says a lot about people. The colonial period was brutal. And of course, we'll talk about why. When you want to talk about people who paid the price, I would say the highest price was paid by indigenous people, Native Americans, of course, who were often displaced. It led to the transatlantic slave trade, which is one of the most barbaric events in human history. So I believe that when examining history, we have to look at everything, the good and the bad. What you need to understand about the Jamestown colony is that the Jamestown colony was established as a business deal. I mean, the people who went to Jamestown were not doing it because they were looking for religious freedom or trying to escape, persecution or anything like that. This was a business deal, pure and simple. There was a belief that there was money to be had by establishing colonies in the New World. That's all there is to it, really. It was a business deal financed by the Virginia Company of London of 1606. What do you think? People back then were not interested in money and interested in taking a risk to make money? What do you think? People today love money more than people loved money then? Come on. So this was a business deal. It didn't work out very well for them. The land where they established the colony was not really a very good spot. There were problems with access to fresh drinking water and insects and mosquitoes and difficulty with securing a food supply. And the relationship with the local Powhatan Indians was not a good one. The colony could have been utterly annihilated at the beginning, but it wasn't, because the chief of the Powhatan sort of wanted to play a wait and see game here, and find out, well, maybe there's something with these people that we can do that will be to our advantage. But the power balance is going to shift. There's the famous story, of course, of Pocahontas, where she was the daughter of the chief, the leader of the Powhatan. I believe his name was pronounced Wahunse-Nakewa, which is the Native American name. And there's, of course, the famous story of John Smith being taken prisoner, and he claimed that he was saved, his life was rescued because Pocahontas asked her father to spare him. Later on, of course, she was captured by the British and ended up marrying another Englishman named John Rolfe, Rolfe, who you need to know. She was young when she married. First of all, what you need to understand about this period of time, we're talking the 17th century here. Life expectancies were much shorter. I mean, I would be a senior citizen by that point, although I feel like one already. But I mean, basically, people got married once you entered puberty. Basically, you were eligible for marriage in those days. People married young, and well, I mean, when she died, she was probably in her early 20s, 22, 23, maybe, when she died. So she probably got married at, I don't know, 16, 17. She married John Rolfe, another Englishman. She converted to Christianity, and she actually went with him to London, where she became sort of a celebrity, you might say. And then, of course, she got sick and died. I want you to be aware of John Rolfe, because it is John Rolfe who established the cash crop economic system, which would lead to the plantation system, which would lead to slavery. I mean, what I'm about to say to you might sound a little crazy. So you listen to what I'm about to say, and then you tell me if I'm crazy or if this makes any sense at all. The Jamestown colony is established as a business deal. It's not doing well. I already covered with you the period called the Starving Time, and we talked about the cannibalism and all the rest. As a business deal, this is a failure. John Rolfe discovered that tobacco could be grown in the area that is today called Virginia. So now they're going to grow tobacco, and they're going to have a product that they can sell back in England. That's why it's called a cash crop. So what happens is the cash crop economy means that colonists and new arrivals too, and colonists who are having children, everybody's going to want more land to grow more tobacco to sell to make more money. That's going to lead to a couple of things. Number one, it's going to lead to the displacement of Native Americans who are inhabiting those lands. But it's also going to lead to the establishment of the plantation system, which will require a labor source to do this work. Indigenous people, generally speaking, did not work out well for Europeans who hoped to enslave them, often because their lack of immunity to European diseases caused a lot of problems. So they want a labor source that they can control. So in the end, in 1619, the first African slaves arrive. So here's my thought. The cash crop economy leads to the plantation system. The plantation system leads to slavery, and the southern colonies and later southern states are going to become dependent on slavery to maintain that system. They're going to start out with tobacco. Later on, cotton will dominate. So you have a system here where you have an entire economic system very quickly that is going to become dependent on slave labor. Think about that for a moment. And that system is going to continue to grow and expand throughout the remainder of the 17th century, throughout the entire 18th century and well into the 19th century. So it's going to plant its roots, this economic system that depends on slavery to function. The Civil War is going to come, slavery will be abolished, but the issue of providing for justice and equality and protecting the rights of former slaves, in the end will fail. And former slaves will then become the victims of a segregationist system, Jim Crow, victims of racial violence, the works. Here's my point. I would argue that if you look at some of the racial and social divisions in the country today, right now, today, you can go back and peel it back layer by layer, and you can say we have racial tension and discrimination and problems and racism and all the rest. And it can go back to the fact that when slavery was abolished in 1865 during Reconstruction, the issues of true equality and justice were not addressed at that time. Then you go back further and you have the establishment of slavery and the plantation system and the cash crop economy. So I guess the bottom line is it's all John Rolfe's fault. Guy should have never planted those damn tobacco seeds. I mean, I know that's an overly simplistic interpretation of it, but what I'm trying to establish is that when you look at history, it builds layer on layer on layer. For example, what do geologists do when they want to study weather patterns in history? They'll take a soil sample and they'll go down deep into the soil, right? And then they'll look at all the layers that built up over the centuries. And it tells them about weather patterns and it can tell them different things. History works the same way. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that if you look at where we are today, we weren't alive back then when any of this stuff happened, right? But we are still living with the impact of it. That's the point I'm trying to make. Whether you're interested in history or not, we're connected to it. We today are connected to the fact that the Jamestown colony ended up establishing a plantation system, and in 1619, slaves were sold for the first time in what is now Virginia. And had that not happened, the entire history of where we are today would be completely different, is what I'm trying to say. Everything is connected to everything. Things don't just happen spontaneously in terms of a nation's identity and culture. It builds up over time. So am I onto something here, or do I just sound like I'm just crazy or what? I mean, I want you to think historically. I want you to understand how the past influences the present, is what I'm trying to do. They wanted a labor force to help with this Jamestown colony. For a while, they tried to see if they could solve their problems by the use of indentured servants. What is an indentured servant? An indentured servant is someone who agrees to work for you for a designated period of time. So an indentured servant is different from a slave because they voluntarily agree in most cases, not all, but generally it's a mutually agreed exchange. You provide your labor, and in return, we give you something else, whether it's training, whether it's land, whether it's we'll pay for your transportation, we'll pay off your debt, something. In other words, there's something you want, so you agree to become an indentured servant for a certain period of time. And in and around Jamestown and in what became Greater Virginia, they tried it. And in the end, it didn't meet their labor needs for a few reasons. They tried to recruit people to come over from England to work in the colony as indentured servants. And in order to try to sweeten the deal, as a bonus for some of them, when their time of service would end, they would receive land as a sort of bonus. So the reason why they didn't want to use indentured servants is, number one, you could not guarantee you would have a steady labor supply. Number two, once their service was up, they got to walk away. And number three, you may end up having to give them land, and now they are a competitor. So this system, in the end, didn't work to meet the labor needs, and that's why, in the end, they turned to slavery. I think that slavery is immoral and an absolute evil. It is worth pointing out that Europeans didn't invent it. Slavery has been around since ancient times. And when European traders went to Africa, even before the establishment of the North American colonies, slavery existed. And many of the people who were sold to slave traders were, in essence, sold out by their neighbors who were happy to get some money or weapons or whatever else they could get, and maybe get rid of some pesky neighbors at the same time, and have access to their lands. I don't want to be overly negative, but one of the horrible lessons of history is the degree to which people will screw each other over for money. It's a horrible thing to say. And incidentally, I do not have a problem if I say something like that and you think I'm being too negative, or you know, or I'm being unfair in my analysis of it, and you don't agree, then that's fine with me. I know I almost want students to disagree with me. I hated taking classes where the only way to survive the class was to agree with the teacher all the time. I hated it then. I don't like it now. I almost want to get you to debate me and disagree. But I think one of the I mean, think about the slave trade for a minute. Think of all the people who profited on this human suffering and agony. All right. The people who basically helped capture and sell out their neighbors in Africa to the slave traders, they profited. The slave traders themselves profited. The people who built and operated the slave ships, they profited. The slave auctioneers, they profited. And the people who bought the slaves to do the work, they profited. The number of people who are basically making a profit on the human suffering and agony of other people is extraordinary. And I hate to ruin your youthful college idealism, but there are an awful lot of people today who are profiting on the misery of others. It is a tragic reality of the human condition. What can I tell you? I mean, I've made the comment, and I want you to think about it. You know, do the subjects I cover have a modern day equivalent? I'll tip my hand and say, yeah, you better believe it. What do you think? Slavery's dead today? You think the modern world doesn't have slavery? Of course it does. Next to illegal drugs, human trafficking is the second largest illegal economy in the world. And that includes even in the San Diego area. I mean, has it ever occurred to you that while you're sitting here in front of a computer screen listening to me, there are men, women, and children who are bought and sold like cattle, who have no control over their own lives, who are treated worse than you would treat a dog? It's a horrible reality, which is why I'm a terrible history teacher for my child, because I have a son who's 9 years old and he asks me questions about history. And so the problem is, how do I teach him what happened in the past without taking away his childhood innocence and its agony? He came to me one day and he says, "Daddy, why did John Wilkes Booth shoot Abraham Lincoln?" How do I explain that to a child accurately without requiring him to know things about life that I really don't want him to know? That's tough. And I'm sure those of you who have kids or young members of your family, you want to protect them and you want to teach them, but you want them to enjoy being a kid as long as possible. That's a tough one. Interesting things that happened. Kiana, I see you have a question. Let's wait, and it'll be easier for me because I get off track. That's a problem with age. Let's wait until the end. Save your question and we'll wait till the end, and then I'll do all the questions at once. It makes it easier for me to move forward. 1619 is an interesting time in Virginia because we have the creation of something called the House of Burgesses. What is the House of Burgesses? The House of Burgesses, in some ways, is what I like to describe as a seed of democratic governance in the New World. You have to remember that even though England was technically a monarchy, it did have a parliament, it did have laws, and people who came over to North America who were, from England, they understood what it meant to have institutions to govern and to have institutions where people could debate and people could, and laws could be made. And at the end of the day, you're not going to be very successful if you're trying to establish colonies if you don't have some sort of system of law and order. So in 1619, which incidentally is the same year that the first African slaves arrived in Virginia, the House of Burgesses was created as a representative assembly to basically create laws to govern the colony. This is what I call a seed of democracy. It is nothing like what we think of democracy today. The only people who were eligible to be members of the House of Burgesses basically were the landowning class. So this is not like democracy where people just get to vote and there is wide participation in decision making. In the beginning, that type of authority was limited to people who owned land, but it is a beginning. It's a beginning, and it's relevant because it establishes the idea of people in the New World who will choose their own representatives and who will make their own laws. They're still subject to the authority of the king, but in terms of day-to-day matters and how they will run the colony, they are creating rules, laws, and guidelines. So the House of Burgesses is significant for that reason. And even today, the state of Virginia, its legislature can trace its origin back to the House of Burgesses. So I would like you to be aware of it, and you will have a question about it on your quiz. Moving along, it should come as no surprise that as the plantation system was established and more land was being taken for planting tobacco, tension with the American Indians was going to increase. That is a theme and a story that is going to be repeated over and over and over, not only during the history of the colonial period, but the history of the United States as well. I mean, this is a story in a way that, it begins with Columbus and it goes all the way up to the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890. In many ways, history is a story about people doing whatever they feel they have to do to get what they want. As I've said it before, I'm not discounting all the positive developments in history, but it's a brutal subject. People, in many cases, are ruthless in the pursuit of their self-interest. That's all there is to it. I mean, in all fairness, seriously, do you really think that the people living in and around Jamestown seriously gave a damn about whether or not there were American Indians living in that region? Do you seriously think that people were going to get together at the House of Burgesses and say, we'd really like to expand and take more land and establish more plantations and plant more tobacco, and we'd just love to do that, but we just can't do it because it just wouldn't be right, because there are already Native Americans living there and we have to respect them? Do you really think that's a conversation that was common in those days? Come on. Even when the United States was established, hell, when Andrew Jackson was president, he forced, the Cherokee Indians off their land at the point of a gun. Signed a law in 1830 called the Indian Removal Act. So, look, come on. People do what is in their interest, and if other people are harmed by it, Some people are bothered by it, and some people, frankly, just don't care. I mean, you think the people who are engaged in human trafficking today, what do you think they have trouble sleeping at night because they feel so guilty about what they're doing? Do you think the people who were engaged in this transatlantic slave trade in the 17th century had to see a therapist because they were so grief stricken and guilty, felt so guilty about what they were doing? Raise your hand if you know someone who is perfectly willing to screw over other people so long as it's good for them. They just don't care. What a shock. You know people who fit that description. I'm about to ask a terrible question. Uh, Terrible question. How many of you know someone who, if they lived in the Jamestown colony back in the 17th century and they could make money by establishing a plantation, they would do it knowing that they were displacing Native Americans to do it, and they would do it anyway because they just wouldn't care so long as they got what they wanted? Yeah. This is the worst question. How many of you know somebody who, if they were alive back then and they could make money buying or selling slaves, they'd probably do it? If there was money in it and they could get away with it, they'd do it. Oh my, think about that though. If you really believe that you know someone who would do that, what does that say about us as human beings? You know, the big problem is we keep waiting for the right, if only we have the right leaders, and if only we have the right economic system, and if only we have the right just society, we can eliminate these problems. I'm not convinced, because I don't think the issues are about capitalism versus socialism or Democrat, Republican. I think the issues are human nature. The issues are from within. And I don't think there's a system of government or an economic system or leadership that's going to change what's inside the human heart. That's my thinking on that. And again, you're free to disagree. This Jamestown colony in the end never made money. Even when they started selling tobacco, they always lost more than they made. And in 1624, the charter for the colony was canceled, and Virginia, which incorporates not just Jamestown, but the area outside of Jamestown that is known as the colony of Virginia, named after the Virgin Queen, Queen Elizabeth, simply became a royal colony of England. Remember when we talked about that starving time, and by the winter of 1609, 1610, by the time it was over, you have about 50 colonists left alive in, say, 1610. By 1650, in around Jamestown in Virginia, you have about 15,000 people. So within 40 years, now you really have the seeds of this colony being planted. You have about 15,000 people there. And I want you to be aware of it. And the English are not going to be limited simply by, having this colony in Virginia. They're going to want more land in North America. And so there will be other colonies established. I mean, Jamestown is the first to survive, and Virginia is, considered, generally speaking, the earliest. But it won't take long before we're going to see the establishment of the Carolina colony, which will later be split into North Carolina and South Carolina. There will be the establishment of Maryland and the establishment of Georgia. And all these colonies, they're going to be similar in some ways, very different in other ways. One of the interesting things about this period is that specific individuals or families could be granted what were called proprietary colonies. And basically what that means is, think of it this way. I am the King of England, and Joseph Kramer, you have loaned me money, or you have provided me with men to help when I've had to fight a war. You have provided me with loyal service. I want to thank you for your service, or maybe I want to pay back a debt. So what am I going to do, sir? I'm simply going to give your family 10 million acres of land in the New World. How's that? And isn't that great? And the best part for me is it doesn't cost me a thing. And getting back to the earlier point that I made, I mean, do you really think the King of England or the British Parliament said, we'd really like to, establish more colonies over there in North America, but, we just can't, it just wouldn't be right because, all these native people are living there. They didn't care. They really didn't. So the colony of Maryland was basically a gift to a very prominent family called the Calvert family, Calvert. And the main city in Maryland today is Baltimore, named after Lord Baltimore. And if you look today at the state flag of Maryland, it is basically the Calvert family, family crest or coat of arms, or in those days, noble families, you had to have your own symbol, your flag, your coat of arms, your family crest. So the Calvert family had theirs, and to this day, the state flag of Maryland is basically representing the Calvert family. And I wonder how many people live there today and don't even know it. Baltimore is named after Lord Baltimore. Lord Baltimore was very sympathetic to the fact that Catholics in England were being persecuted because of their religion. Remember, we talked about how England was kind of going through, it started out Catholic, and then under Henry VIII, it went Protestant. And then under his daughter, Queen Mary, she tried to make it Catholic again. And then under Queen Elizabeth I, it went back to Protestant. So what it basically meant was that if you happened to be the wrong religion at the time, you were going to experience some trouble. So Baltimore basically became a colony that was welcoming for people who were Catholic. So that is one of the primary characteristics of the Maryland colony. So I'd like you to be aware of that. And it is a proprietary colony in the sense that the Calvert family were basically the owners of this colony. They were the proprietors of it. Now, technically, they still have to obey the authority of the king. But the king's basic attitude was, I'm going to give you this land, so long as you don't do anything that would upset me, run it as you please. And back in the day, years ago, when I used to teach high school, and I survived. I'm a survivor of that. Back in the day, I would give students an assignment where I would pretend that I am the king and I am giving them a colony in the new world. And they had to create their own family crest, and they had to come up with a name for the colony, and they had to come up with what the rules and the guiding principles were going to be. And it was an assignment that appealed to teenagers with the attention span of a goldfish. But they liked it, especially the kids who were good at drawing. They loved it. So I want you to be aware of the establishment of the Maryland colony. One of the interesting things about the North American English colonies at this time is that they were able to develop very independently, almost from the beginning. And a big reason for that is that England experienced a civil war. There was a war simply called the English Civil War, where on one side you had forces that it's a power struggle. And on one side you have the forces that are loyal to the king, in this case, King Charles I. And then on the other side, you have forces that were loyal to the British Parliament, and they fight it out. Well, while all of this is going on, let's just say what was going on in the American colonies was not exactly a priority at that time. But what it did do was it allowed these colonies to sort of develop on their own without a lot of micromanagement from the mother country. Think of it this way. How many of you, when you were growing up, your parents were really busy, or maybe you lived with a single parent who was working all the time. And the result of it was that you grew up in a way that allowed you to become very independent. How many of you had a childhood where, you could basically do your own thing so long as you didn't get in trouble, so long as you kept up decent grades and didn't get in trouble, you had a lot of independence and freedom growing up. And then I have other students where, mom and dad are still trying to pick out their classes for them and micromanaging everything they do. So some of you may have that in your description. But what happens is when you're allowed to make your own decisions and you're allowed to basically run your own life without being micromanaged, you become very independent and you become better at making decisions. So while the English Civil War is going on, people living in the English colonies are very independent. They are used to figuring out their own solutions to problems. They are pursuing their own interests, and they're not asking, England for permission for every little thing. So that is sort of one of the side effects of this. It isn't that England didn't want to control necessarily, but they had more pressing issues closer to home, is what I'm trying to say. And when we get to the chapter on the American Revolution, one of the arguments that I always make is that Americans fought the revolution not so much to gain independence, but to keep independence. Because once you're used to being independent, you are not going to sit by passively and have that taken from you. Those of you who are very independent, how many of you still live at home, but you're still pretty independent? Like you live at home, but you basically do your own thing. What would happen if all of a sudden, starting today, if you're living with a parent, the parents all of a sudden start asking you, where are you going? What are you doing? How are you spending your money? Who are you hanging out with? Would you just go along with that or would you resist it? Because you're used to doing your own thing. But this is what's going to happen with the American colonies. The English for a long time are basically going to have a hands-off approach. And then later, after the French and Indian War going into the 1760s, all of a sudden they're going to decide they want to micromanage everything and it's going to blow up in their face. It's like having a parent who is not very engaged with you because they have a lot of stuff going on. And then all of a sudden they decide, I need to start acting more like a dad or a mom. And next thing you know, they go from not asking you a lot of questions to asking you everything you're doing, and they want an explanation for everything. So I'm trying to explain this in a way so that you can understand and relate to it. King Charles I was on the losing end of the English Civil War. In fact, in 1649, he was found guilty of treason and he was beheaded. They chopped his head off. So after that, he was speechless. But England was run basically as a sort of military/religious dictatorship by a man named Oliver Cromwell. And during that time, again, there's not a lot of attention being paid to what is going on in the American colonies. And then Cromwell dies, and the British decided, maybe we didn't mind having a king after all. So they invite the exiled son of King Charles I to become king, and he becomes King Charles II, although he becomes a king with considerably less power, but the British monarchy is restored. And then all of a sudden they decide now it's time to get our house in order and let's see what we can do to try and reestablish some control. So they passed these laws called the Navigation Acts, which is going to try to reestablish this mercantilist system of trade. If you are the English government, you don't want your colonies trading with Spain and France. You want their trade to be exclusive, mostly or exclusively with you, because you can control it. You can tax what goes in, you can tax what goes out. You want people living in the colonies to buy products that are made in your country. Why do you think England became a dominant global power? Because they were nice. because they weren't protecting their business interests. Don't you understand the relationship between controlling trade and establishing power? That they go together? Nations that have strong economic systems uh, with trade relationships that are favorable to them, they generally do quite well. There's a reason why England, at the peak of its power, was a dominant world power. They controlled trade all over the world. And they wanted to get a piece of all of it, everything that went in, everything that went out. And they wanted a network where people within that empire traded with each other exclusively to their advantage, meaning the advantage of England. And it made them very powerful and very rich for a long time. I mean, think about it. You know, we're going to talk about later about the Boston Tea Party. I mean, think about it. I mean, India was under English control. And, you know, so if you're in Boston and you want to drink tea, you're buying tea, you know, that is being shipped over from India on ships that are English. The tea is coming from, you know, an English colony in India to an English colony in North America. And they're getting a piece of the action on that, on all of it. So not a bad way to make money. It may not be the fairest system in the world, but it certainly made them rich. Even then, you know, the British wanted, you know, people in their growing colonial empire to pay taxes. A tax on imports is known as a tariff. And think about how great it was and how sweet it was for England. Just think about this, all right? If you're the British government, you can have tobacco shipped from North America, tobacco or cotton, right? Shipped from North America to England, and people in London are going to have to pay a tariff on it because it's an import. So the government's going to collect some money on that. And then if you're living in North America and you're buying goods that are coming over from England, you're going to pay a tax on that. They're getting a piece of everything. Sweet, huh? You know, they get a, you know, it's like a bookie, you know, where you're placing a bet. You know, they're going to get some money out of it, whether, you know, you win or lose. Or buying stock, you know, every time you make a transaction, the broker gets a fee. So it's a good moneymaker, definitely, no question about it. The relationship with Native Americans was tough, and in 1676, things got really ugly. There was an incident known as Bacon's Rebellion, named after a man named Nathaniel Bacon. So basically, here's what happens. Jamestown, you know, just like with today, you know, you have your people who have more money, better land, they've established trade, they're doing well. And then you've got other people who are struggling. Maybe they're poor, or they're working harder, they're living outside of the main town center trying to make a living. Nathaniel Bacon was a farmer living out on the frontier in Virginia. And he alleged that his farm and his neighbors were under threat by hostile Indians who were, you know, stealing their corn, or maybe stealing their animals, or threatening the safety and security of their families. So Nathaniel Bacon goes to the governor of Jamestown, Governor Berkeley, and he says, those of us living out in the frontier are having problems with the Indians, and we want you to help us. We want you to organize a militia, and we're going to go after these Indians, and we're going to, you know, establish our authority, and we're going to punish them, and we're going to establish a military deterrence. Governor Berkeley is not convinced. He says, look, I'm not quite ready to take that step just yet. Let's just wait and see, and let's gather more information. Well, everyone knew that Governor Berkeley, in addition to being the governor, was also instrumental in controlling the trade that went on between the colony and the natives. So, you know, the assumption was made, and there's probably some truth to it, that one of the reasons why Governor Berkeley was reluctant to take action is that he's doing trade with these people, and that it would be potentially harmful to his own business interests if he were to organize an attack against the natives. So Nathaniel Bacon basically decides that he has two enemies, the Indians and the governor. Bacon organizes his own militia and launches attacks against Native Americans. He wasn't very particular about the American Indians that he attacked, whether they were the ones who he thought were guilty or not. It was pretty brutal and ruthless. And not only does Nathaniel Bacon and his militia attack American Indians, but he also attacks people loyal to Governor Berkeley and actually attacks Jamestown itself, much of which was destroyed in this conflict. It was an ugly conflict. It's called Bacon's Rebellion. It happened in 1676. I still have nightmares about it. It was very terrifying at the time, but it was a long time ago, so I've gotten over it. Just kidding, I'm not that old. And for those of you who took my History 109 class, you are now faced with the reality that my sense of humor has not improved at all, so I'm very sorry. In any case, Bacon's rebellion finally ends when Nathaniel Bacon dies. He wasn't killed in battle. He died from an illness, infectious disease most likely. But Bacon's rebellion is significant for a few reasons. Now think about it. The year is 1676. It's exactly 100 years before the Declaration of Independence. Symbolically, what it represents is a willingness of colonists to rebel against authority, government authority, if and when they feel that that government authority is not protecting or looking out for their interests. I mean, even today, regardless of your own personal political beliefs, there are a lot of people today who are very suspicious of government power. I mean, is government there to serve us, or is it there to serve itself? Are the people who seek political office seeking it because they want to make the world a better place, or are they seeking it in pursuit of their own ambition? And these are questions that people ask today, and they certainly asked them then. Fair or unfair, Nathaniel Bacon believed that Governor Berkeley was placing his own interests over the interests of the people in the colony. And he had no problem rebelling against that authority. So, I mean, I'm not going to give this to you as an assignment, but you could certainly write a great essay if you were to compare and contrast, Bacon's rebellion with the American Revolution, or even with the issues that we're dealing with in the country today. A willingness of people to say, government is not helping me, it's hurting me, and a willingness to rebel against authority. And that is part of the culture of the country, really. It goes back right to the very beginning. I mean, Jamestown was established in 1607. Here we are, it's 1676, and already, there's conflict between colonists and Indians. There's conflict between colonists and, government officials. I mean, it didn't take very long, did it, for this to happen? So you are going to be asked about Bacon's rebellion. I spoke to you a little earlier about slavery, and I'm going to end today by showing you something that'll just blow your mind. But before I do, I want to talk about the southern colony of Georgia. Georgia is the last of the southern colonies to be established during this period. It was established in 1732 by a man named James Oglethorpe. And one of the reasons why the Georgia colony was established is that Florida at the time, although technically under Spanish control, it was basically a land without governance. And for people who were living in South Carolina, for example, Florida was basically a land where you had Native American tribes, like the Seminole tribe, for example, and others. As colonists began to move closer into what is today modern day Georgia and closer to what is now Florida, they certainly felt threatened by Indian attacks. There were concerns about pirates who were using, the Florida coast as a place to conduct their operations and to hide also. And there was also a fear of the potential of Spanish influence trying to expand into North America. So the Georgia colony was established basically as a buffer to block that. So in other words, the British decided We need to colonize that area first. Make sure the Spanish don't. And if we can colonize Georgia, it eliminates several problems. Number one, it allows us to establish a presence that is large enough to fend off Indian attacks from what is now Florida. Number two, it allows us to maintain greater control and be able to resist the problem caused by pirates operating in the Caribbean and out of Florida. And number three, it blocks the Spanish from expanding into North America. So that's why the Georgia colony was established. In order to recruit people to go and live there, they offered people a deal where if you were living in England and you couldn't pay your debts, in those days, you didn't get an angry letter or a call from a debt collector. If you couldn't pay your debts in those days, you went to debtor's prison. You went to jail. If you had debts and you defaulted on your debts. So here's an opportunity. You're sitting in debtor's prison. You've defaulted on your debts. You have no money. You have no future. You have nothing. Tell you what, agree to go to this new Georgia colony, start your life over, clean slate, get out of jail and have a chance to own some land for yourself and start a new life. Not a bad deal. And a lot of people took that deal. I think a lot of people would take that deal today. And that is one of the reasons why the Georgia colony was established. In closing, and I've got so much stuff I want to talk about, I could go on endlessly. Wouldn't you love that? We'll just spend hours and hours and hours here in front of me, listening to me on Zoom. Actually, it's unconstitutional because the Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishment. I do want to talk about the triangular trade and the Middle Passage that brought slaves from Africa to the New World. It is estimated that one out of every six did not survive. Slaves were chained, their movement was restricted. They weren't exactly allowed to have bathroom breaks and had to lie in their own filth. Feces, urine, vomit, infectious disease spread quickly. People being victims of sexual abuse, rape was not unusual. I mean, the thought that human beings could, under any circumstances, do this to other human beings is horrific. And that's, in the end, the most terrifying thing about history in general, what people are willing to do to each other. Whether we're talking about the Holocaust and the concentration camps of World War II, whether we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, whether we're talking about the massacres of American Indians, at the end of the day, history, in a way, it's, I call it American Horror Story, because the things that people are willing to do to each other are unbelievable, especially if there's money involved. But I've got something to show you here that I saw at a faculty meeting one time, and it was so powerful that I've used it in my classes. And it's a history of the slave trade where a historian looked at all the records of slave ships, where they left, where they went, and what year and what their destination was. And each slave ship represents a dot on this map. And when you see it, you're going to be stunned. You're just going to be stunned. So check this out. This is unbelievable. Just watch this. Each black dot represents a slave ship. And incidentally, most slaves didn't come to North America. They went to the Caribbean and South America. Remember, each one of those dots represents a ship filled with men, women, and children. And a lot of people making a lot of money on that human suffering. Don't forget that. It's incredible and sickening at the same time, isn't it? Isn't that unbelievable? And yet here we are. We think we live in a modern world, and yet we still have a problem called human trafficking in this world and in this country. So, I mean, have things really changed all that much in a way? Uh, so what can I tell you? So that's all I have to say for the moment. I would like now to set it up. So if anyone has any questions, they may ask, and then we'll call it a day. Questions? There was someone earlier with a hand up, and I said wait to the end. So if you're still there, now's the time. Unless I answered your question in my lecture. Anyone with a question? You can change the scenery, not the situation. Yeah. But the reason for that, I think, is human nature. That's my personal view, of which you are certainly free to disagree. So this week's reading is going to be chapter 2, the settlement in the colonial South. I want you to be reading the next chapter. I want you to be ahead. You should be reading. There's a syllabus in Canvas. Click on syllabus, and it's going to show you what I want you to read. And if the chapter numbers don't line up with your book because you have an older edition, that's fine. Don't worry about chapter numbers. Worry about topics. Follow the syllabus. Yes, go ahead. Unmute yourself. I can't hear you. There you go. Still can't hear you. It's weird. There's something wrong with your audio. You might want to, email me your question because your audio is not coming through. By the way, how were the indentured servants treated? Not well. Not well at all, generally speaking. Ms. Cabrera, for whatever reason, your audio isn't working well, but that's okay. Just email me and do me a favor. Don't worry. Relax. Everything is fine. Relax. Anyone else have a question for me? Brandon, you had a question or no? No? Anyone else with a question? Ms. Cabrera, I don't know why your audio wasn't working well, but that's okay. Just email me. I am not going to be posting the quiz today. No, relax. When I post it, I will email you and you will have plenty of advance notice. I am not going to throw anything at you. So don't worry about that. And if no one has any questions, then you're free to go. Then we'll call it a day. And I will email you everything. So don't worry. Just read your book and study. That's all I want.